Hey guys, David East here, and welcome back to part 2 of making a combo box with Square UI. In the previous tutorial, we took a combo box from a PSD and created it into an HTML version. Now, whereas our HTML and CSS looks good, there's a couple problems with the jQuery. The problem with our jQuery is it's not very modular. We're just sort of throwing click handlers at the bottom of the page. If we were to use this combo box onto multiple pages, we would have to take this code and link it in on each page. And then every time we wanted to modify it, things could get a little bit hairy. So the first idea you might get is, well, let's turn this into a jQuery plugin. But there are some problems with that. Now let's first start out by putting it into a jQuery plugin, and then you'll see what I mean. So we're not going to dive too deep into how to make jQuery plugins, but this will just be a quick little kickstart on how to get one up and running. The first thing that you want to do for creating a jQuery plugin is to create a self-invoking anonymous function, which conveniently we have set up right here. So inside of our self-invoking anonymous function, let's create our plugin. So we're going to tap into $.fn, which is the way you attach plugins onto jQuery. So we'll call our plugin .combobox. And just to show you that this works, let's just console.log hello. And below this unordered list, let's create an HTML element. It can just be a div for now. We'll give an ID of test combo. And below the self-invoking anonymous function, let's target and we'll call .combobox on it. So here in Chrome, we can see that we have hello logged out to the console. And if we click to see where it's linked to, we can see that we're getting the console.log hello from the combobox plugin. So let's get rid of the test div, and let's paste the code we made in the last tutorial into the plugin. So now let's call the combobox plugin on our combo box. So back in Chrome, let's click the go button, and we can see that it works. And you may think this is all you need to do, but there's a bit more to it. Right now this plugin may do what you basically want it to do, but you're leaving out some core functionality for jQuery. Now after you call combo box, let's say we want to get the children for some reason. And let's log out the children to the console. So back in Chrome, we can see that we're getting an error called uncaught type error, cannot call method children if undefined. And if we click to where it's linked to, we see we're getting what we're calling .children onto the combo box. And the reason why we're getting this error message is that we're not returning this, so you can't chain any calls onto this plugin. It kills the jQuery chain. And that's not something we really want. Chaining is one of the great features of jQuery. So if you want people to use your plugin, or just your plugin to be useful in general, you really need to keep the chain going. So up here, we're going to return this.each, and we're going to pass in a function. And essentially what this is the element or collection of elements that we're calling the combo box plugin on. So down here, since we're calling .combobox, which signifies a class, if there are more than one combo boxes on the page, we're going to loop through them and run the code for each of them that we're returning from this .combobox selector. And inside of here, we want to get the element that we're applying this to. So we're going to say $this equals this wrapped in a $. Now let's paste our code in. And instead of targeting combo box by its class, let's target it with the this keyword. And down here we actually can say this.siblings, since the combo box options is next to the combo box and not inside of it. So now that we're returning this, which is the jQuery element, we'll be able to continue chaining. And now in our console we can see that we're no longer getting an error, and we're actually getting the text box inside of the combo box. And the reason why that is because it's the first child inside of the combo box, which is the text box. So now we have chaining enabled, but we don't have any functionality for options or defaults. So to get options, we want to provide an options variable for our combo box plugin. And to get defaults, we could create a variable called defaults here, or we could add a defaults object onto our combo box plugin by calling $.fn.combobox.defaults. And one of the defaults we can have is open. And this is if the options are open. And so by default, let's say we don't want it to be, so we'll say false. And now that we have defaults, we need to merge them with any options that the user might specify. And whatever the user specifies needs to overwrite any defaults. So to do so, let's use jQuery's extend, and we'll pass in the defaults, and then we'll pass through the user's options. And this will turn the object that overrides any of the defaults with the user's options, but if the user doesn't override any of the defaults will exist. and we'll call this variable settings. And settings will be in scope for the function below. So let's see if we can set if the combo box will be open. So we can say settings.isOpen, and if it's open, let's show it. And right down here, we're actually selecting the combo box options. So let's store this into a variable. If the settings has the combo box is open is true, then we want to show it. Else, we don't want it to show. And instead of putting an else statement in, we can just hide it initially. And if it's opened, this will show. If it's not opened, we will have this hidden. So down here at the bottom, we'll get rid of the console.log and we'll just call the combo box plugin, and the options should not be shown. So as we can see that the options aren't shown and the plugin still works as expected. Now if we pass through isOpen is true, we should see that the combo box options are open. And as we can see, the combo box options are open and the plugin still works as expected. So now we have a pretty functional jQuery plugin. And this seems to work pretty well. So why wouldn't we want to use this? Well, there's a couple reasons why. Let's say we want to get the selected element from our combo box. How would we go about doing that? One of the great ways to do that is we could just provide a function inside of our plugin. So we could say .combobox, and we could say we want to get the value. But the problem with that is that value will be treated as the options object that we're passing through. So we could write some logic, so we could say something like the method and options, and then if it's just options, we can detect that and just pass through options and initialize, or if it's just a string, then we could call the method. And that can be a bit complex to do. And another thing is that we have a pretty complex set of markup that is just replacing a select element. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just create a select element and then we could call the combo box plugin on the select element, and it actually hides the select element and creates this markup on the page automatically for us. So we could easily write this into the plugin, but things are going to get really hairy doing everything inside this .each function. So we could organize our code and create our own way of doing this, but like I've said before, that can all get a bit complicated, and it can be pretty hard to test and figure out what's going on when something goes wrong. So a really good solution would be to use the jQuery UI widget factory. So if you go to jQueryui.com/widget, you'll get a nice little rundown on what the widget factory is. And if you're not familiar with the widget factory, it's how every single jQuery UI widget is created. It's essentially a base class for how everything works. So here's a demo they have for it, and it's just a simple color changer. If you click a button, it changes colors. And one amazing thing you can do here is that you can actually toggle the disabled option. And when you do that, everything here becomes disabled. Now you think that might be a method that they implement, but actually by using convention and sticking to certain standards, this will automatically be implemented for you, which is a great piece of functionality from the jQuery UI widget factory. So if we come down here and take a look at the source, we can see that they're just referencing jQuery UI, and they have some of their own custom CSS to help build the look above. But let's focus down on the JavaScript. Inside of a document ready function, which is just waiting to see if the DOM has been loaded, they create a widget called custom.colorize. And so right here, they're doing $widget, and they're saying custom.colorize. And the comment above gives us a bit more information about what it's doing. And the comment says, the widget definition, where custom is the namespace, colorize the widget name. So colorize is the widget that they're creating above. And as we can see down below where they're calling it, they have $mywidget1.colorize. So just by specifying colorize as a string, they've already created the widget name, and they're able to call it here. Let's go back up to the top and keep going through. They create options right here, and these are defaults, and they automatically handle how they get overridden, so we don't have to worry about calling extend. Then we can see that there's an underscore create function. And essentially what this comment's saying is that it's the constructor. And this is initially called when the widget is created. And you might be wondering why it's an underscore in front of create. And the reason why that is that by convention, underscore means that this is a private method, and that we won't be calling underscore create from the widget. So you won't see .colorize and there a string pass through of underscore create. And inside here, you can see that this keyword, they have access to the element in which the widget is being called on. And they're starting to do some actions inside of here. And one thing to look at is the this._on function. and they're saying on this.changer, and this.changer is just a button that they're creating dynamically. And they're saying on this changer, when it's clicked, call the random function. And the random function is just created right down here. So that's a nice way to modularize your code. And another benefit of using the _on function is that whenever your plugin is disabled, any event that was bound with the this._on function will be disabled, and you won't have to write any logic to handle it in a disabled state. And then this._refresh is being called. So even though I said anything with an underscore is private by convention, it still can be called within the widget. So you can create little private classes inside your widget, which you're not worried about being accessed by the user. So the refresh function is called when the widget is created, but it also gets called whenever options are changed during the widget's lifecycle. And one other function to take note of is the this._trigger function. And this triggers a callback or an event. And the change string pass through maps up to the change option pass through. And this is essentially a callback function. So if the user, instead of null, passes in a function, so every time something is changed, they want to alert the user, or they want to do whatever their own custom logic is, that can be triggered with just this function. And now you can natively write this with JavaScript with the apply method, but this makes it a lot easier, and it's abstracted out into a function that you know is just going to work. So now let's focus on the random function. This is the first function we've seen that doesn't have an underscore in front of it, and that's because it's a public method. And if we read the comment above, we'll see exactly what it means. It says a public method to change the color to a random value can be called directly via the .colorize random. And so that means that we can pass through the string random, and it's going to call this function. Anything that doesn't have an underscore in front of it is a public method and essentially is the API for the user. And down here we have an underscore destroy function. And inside this function, you'll remove any effects or any dynamic elements or whatever you've done in this widget so far, you'll remove it. So you'll just be left in the state that you are in before you even called the widget. And lastly, down here at the bottom, we have the set options and the set option functions, which are private due to the underscore. And set options isn't something that you change too often, it's just something you paste in. And that's because what you do change a lot is set option. Underscore set option allows us to do validation on any options that the user passes through. So right here, they're using regular expression for the red, green, blue options, and they're saying if any of these options have a value that's less than 0 or greater than 255, then we're not going to use them. And the reason why that is because they're using an RGB value, and nothing outside of this range would be valid for RGB. So now that we have a nice rundown of how the jQuery UI widget factory works, let's paste in this code and let's modify it and create our combo box widget with it. So I copied in the code from the website and added it to a separate file called squareui.combobox.js. So before we get editing, let's remember what we're actually trying to achieve. Right now, we have this pretty verbose set of markup for creating our combo box. What we want to achieve is just creating a select element, and then whenever we call the combo box widget on that select element, we want to transform it to this markup. So that way we don't have to type this out every time we want to use that widget. And as a benefit, we're still working with a native HTML form element, so any form posts that we do will still work just as usual. So just like last time, let's set up a to-do list to create a game plan. The first thing that we want to do is we want to create a combo box from a select element. Second thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to implement the show hide functionality that we did before. Then we're going to want to implement the selected item functionality. And then we're going to want to implement a destroy function, so whenever the object is destroyed, we're just left with a basic select list. And then as a bonus, we're going to implement an autocomplete. So every time the user types in something to the text box, it'll filter out the options. So now our game plan is set. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create the widget name. So the namespace is custom, and we're going to just call our namespace Square UI. And we're going to name our widget Combo Box. And we can get rid of these options right here. And one thing that we might want to pass through as an option is button text. And by default, we'll just call it go. And we are going to need a change callback, so let's just get rid of the random one. And we're going to need the is open option as well, and we'll set that to false. And that's probably all we're going to need as far as options go. So let's focus on the create method, which is our constructor of the widget. So inside of a constructor, we can do all the initial things we need to do to create our combo box. So let's just put a gap between the code from jQuery UI's website and what we're going to do. So we'll put a comment and we need to say get the select element. Then we're going to need to hide the select element because we don't want to show the select element. We only want to show the combo box that we're creating. And speaking of that, we want to then create the combo box. Then we want to bind any UI actions to the page, such as the select element and the show hide functionality. And then we want to append the created combo box to the page. So just as a rule of thumb, I try to keep as much logic out of the constructor as possible. If you want to put it into a private helper function, that's usually your best bet. That way you don't have a constructor that's 50 to 100 lines long, which can get pretty confusing. So let's get the select element first. So we'll say select is this dot element. And what this is the jQuery UI widget that we're working with. And the element is the element that the widget is being called on. And you might be thinking right now, well, we called this dot each when we were creating a plugin, and that's because we might be getting a collection of elements back. How is this handling that? And the answer is well, that's handling that for us. It's one of the great features of the jQuery UI widget factory. When we're referring to this, we are confident that it's actually just one instance of an element that we're dealing with, and we're not dealing with the collection of elements. So now that we have the select element, and one thing we could do is we could hide this with CSS, but the simplest thing to do right now is just to do it in JavaScript. And now we're going to need to create the combo box. So ideally we want it to look something like this. So what this is that we're calling a function called create combo box, which is a private function, hence the underscore, and it will return the combo box that is generated from the select list. So let's get rid of the code from the jQuery UI website, including the refresh right here, as for everything in the destroy, and we'll get rid of the if statement and set option, as well as the random function. So now essentially we're just left with a boilerplate of what we need to use for the jQuery UI widget factory. And we'll create our private function for create combo box. So as you can see, it's just the function called underscore create combo box, and we're going to create the HTML for the combo box based upon the select element that the widget is being called on. So let's start off by creating some variables that we're going to need in this function. And the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need the select element. And as we can remember, we can get that by accessing this dot element. And then we're also going to need the options. So we'll just create a variable called ops, and that's just going to be this dot options. And that is the same thing as this options object passed through, and it actually contains any overrides that the user may have specified. And lastly, we're going to create a variable for the combo box that will store all the HTML. And that'll just be an empty string. So since we're going to be creating the combo box, let's paste in the HTML inside of this function and comment it out for reference. So as we can see, we first need to create the combo box div. So we'll say combo box plus equals, and it's this div with the class of combo box. And just a little helpful tip here, if you prefer using double quotes as strings for JavaScript, you might want to switch to using single quotes when creating this. And the reason why that is because of the way we assign attributes to HTML elements is usually, but not always, done in double quotes. So if we're using single quotes in JavaScript, we're not worried about breaking the string. So if I switch these single quotes to double quotes, you can see that the string is broken right here. So whatever you're using to wrap attributes as, whether it's a single quote or double quote, use the opposite for JavaScript. And let's close out this div, and then let's create the text box and the button. And since we're passing the options through, we can actually apply our button text option. And before we go any further, let's just console.log our combo box. And now let's reference this widget into our index.html file and let's call it. Let's collapse our jQuery plugin and comment it out so we don't have any collisions. And below our jQuery reference, I'm going to just paste in the reference for jQuery UI, which is just from a CDN, code.jQuery.com. And now we'll add the reference in for our own widget. So since we're calling this widget on a select list, let's comment out our combo box and let's create a select list. We'll give it an ID of options and we'll give it a couple options. And now down in our self-invoking anonymous function, let's call the widget. And now we see that we have an error of an unexpected identifier, and that's because we didn't close out a comma. So back in our options object, for is open, we just need to add a comma. So now we can see that our select element is hidden, but we have our string down here. We have a div with the class of combo box, we have our text box, and we have our button with the option of go since that's the default, and we close out the div. And some of you might be thinking, sweet, we have this widget working. And some of you might be thinking, where's the formatting? This is all in one line. Is this the way it's going to be in source? And the answer is yes, this will be the way it will be in source unless you add tabbing. And essentially all tabbing is just a /t. And so this will just be one tab space over. And so if we apply it to all these child elements, it'll be tabbed in. So now we can see that we're tabbed out, but everything's still on the same line. And that's because we need to add a new line character. So at the end of every single line, we're going to say /n. So now this might look a little bit better. We have everything on its own line and everything's tabbed out. So some of you might be thinking, oh, finally, I have a nice tabbed out structure, everything's on its own line and it looks great. And some of you might be thinking, I don't really care. You can really go with whatever you want. If you want to maintain this tabbing and new line structure, go right on ahead. But if you want it to be in one line, then that's fine too. But really think about what is the application. Consider whether your user is going to care or whether it'll go completely unnoticed. So now that we have the combo box created, let's work on the options. So we have the main unordered list for combo box options, and I'm just going to add a new line character. And I don't need to tab because it's a sibling. And I'll close out the unordered list. And in between this unordered list, we want to loop through the select element and grab the options, and we want to make them LIs. And some of you might just want to write this function right in between here, but I like to take this and abstract it out to another function. And the function will return all the LIs that we've generated from the options in the select element. So it would be something like this. And we would pass in through the select, and we'd pass through the children, which are the options. You don't have to supply the options keyword. This is just being very specific. So right above the create combo box function, let's create the create LIs function. And let's start out by setting up some variables. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to set self to this. And the reason why we're going to be doing that is because inside of the each loop we're going to be making, we're going to want to reference back to the plugin. Because inside of the each loop, this will actually be the option of the select list that we're looping through. And then also we're going to want to create an LIs variable that's just an empty array. And since we're passing through a parameter of options, let's provide that, and we'll start our each function. So we're going to say for each of the options, and this is the select options, not the options of the widget. So for each of the options, we're going to have a function. And this function, we have a key, which will just be the index. So the first, second, or third select list option. And then we're actually going to have the option. So the option right now is just a native HTML element. So we need to wrap it to make it a jQuery object. So we'll say $option, and we'll wrap it with jQuery, and we have an option. And right here, we could create the string that creates the HTML element, but yet again, I like to abstract this out to a smaller function. So ideally, we'd create a variable called li, and we would call this dot create li. And so this function is called create li's, plural, and this is the singular version. And this function would take in parameters of the option.value and the option.text. And then once we have the list item, we're going to push it onto the li's array. So let's write the function for the singular create li. So this function is just going to return the list item. And so we're going to have a data-value attribute, and that's going to emulate how the value attribute works inside of a select element. And then we'll add the text inside of a span. And the reason why we're wrapping it in a span is that's the way we get it to align in the middle vertically. And we can't forget to use our tab as well as our new line. And now that we're returning a single list item for each one of the options passed through, and we're pushing it onto the array, we need to return the list items. And we don't want to return the list items as an array, we want to return them in a string format. So you might be wondering why we created an array of list items rather than just creating a variable that concatenates each list item as the loop increments. And the reason why that is because we have a sweet little method on our array called join. And what join does is that it concatenates each item in the array together based upon the delimiter that you pass through. So if you pass through a comma, each item will be concatenated, but it will be separated by a comma. And what's super useful about this is that the last item in the array won't have a comma at the end of it. So anytime you've needed to create a list from an array and not have the last item have a comma at the end, you just need to use .join instead of any overly complex if-else logic. But in our case, we just need to use an empty string. And the reason why we're using the empty string as a separator is that we don't care what it's separated by. We're actually using a new line character up here, so each item will still be separated on the HTML view. So let's return to our create combo box function, and let's console.log the value of what combo box is. So as we can see in the JavaScript console, we have an uncaught type error, and it says that object HTML option element has no method create li. So we're going to change this to self because, like I said before, this inside of the jQuery.each function is the current option that we're looping through, whereas self is the widget, so we have access to the create li function. And another thing that we're going to need to do is that we're going to need to change what we're passing through to the create li's function. We're calling .children of options, and it needs to be .children of option. So back in the JavaScript console, we have the HTML that we want to see. We have our combo box with our text box and button, and we have the combo box options that has each list item that represented the options from the select list. So now we'll get rid of the HTML commented out, and instead of console.logging combo box, let's return combo box. And now back up in our create function, since we're getting the combo box, we want to bind UI actions. But we'll skip that just for now, just so we can see it being appended to the page. And now the question is, where do we append it to the page? And we're actually going to want to append it after where the hidden select is, so it's still in the same place as you would expect it to be. So we're going to use the select element, and we're going to say after where the select element is, we're going to append combo box. And one thing we want to make sure is that below our self-invoking anonymous function, we want to get rid of any of this example code we had from before. So now we can see that we have a combo box the way we'd expect it to look, and this is all generated from the select element. So now we need to bind UI actions. But before we bind the UI actions, let's actually set the combo box to the widget instance. So we'll say this dot combo box equals, and we'll just wrap it in jQuery, and we'll say combo box. And then right here, instead of dot after and selecting the combo box, let's just use this dot combo box. So now let's create the function for binding UI actions. So we'll say this dot underscore bind UI actions. So below where we're creating list items in the combo box, we'll just collapse them for better visibility. We'll create a function called bind UI actions. And inside bind UI actions, we want to create the functionality for showing and hiding the combo box options list, as well as the functionality for selecting an item. And if you remember from the example widget, we have a function called this dot underscore on. And the first parameter it takes is a jQuery object. So the jQuery object we need to pass through is the text box button, because when we click the text box button, that decides whether the list will show or hide. So to get that, we could say this dot combo box dot children of .txt button. Inside of the object, we want to specify properties that represent the events that will fire off for this element. And right now we care about the click event. So when the click event is fired, we want a function to fire off. But instead of writing a function inside of on, we can just make a call to another function inside of the widget. And we can call this function underscore open close because we want it to be private. So above bind UI actions, we'll create the function for open close. And just to prove that it works, let's log clicked. So let's click the Go button, and as we can see down on our console, we have clicked appearing, and we actually can see that it's coming from the open close function. So even though this is a string value, the jQuery UI widget factory knows that it's going to point to a function inside of the widget. So now let's replace the console.log, and let's just do the slide toggle on the combo box options. So we can say this dot combo box dot siblings, and we can say dot combo box options dot slide toggle. So now if we click the Go button, it'll hide, but if we click the Go button again, it'll show. However, there's one little piece that we're missing. We need to add the functionality for the isOpen option, because by default, we shouldn't see these list items. So at the top of UI actions, we can say the initial show or hide. So if this.options.isOpen, we can say this.combobox.siblings of combobox options, we can say show it. And just like before, we can just hide it, and we can add it above because by default it will hide. And if they specify anything else, since it's just Boolean, it'll show. So now we can see that our options are hidden. If we click go, they show, and if we click it again, they hide. And one thing you might be noticing right now is that we're calling this.combobox.siblings and this.combobox.children, and we're kind of tapping into the combo box, or we're tapping into the element a little too often. And it'd be nice if we could cache the element so we know we've called to get it just one time rather than multiple times. So up in our create method above bind UI actions, we'll create a function that caches all the elements we need. And it can simply just be called this.cacheElements. And we'll create this function at the very bottom of the widget. So I've pasted in a snippet that grabs the combo box from this.combo box, then it grabs the text box button, the text box, the unordered list of options, the unordered list, and then the options as the list items themselves. So I've pasted in another snippet where I've attached an object onto the widget instance of this, and the object name is cached. And cached now stores all the commonly used elements we've needed. And I've done something a bit different when creating the properties. The properties are created the same way that you would access it with a jQuery selector. So .textbox-button, the class for a text box button, will access the text box button. The same for .combobox-options will get you the unordered list, and .combobox-options-li will get you the list items, and .textbox will get you the text box. So if we just wanted to get the combo box options, it would be as easy as this. This.cached, and using array notation, we'll say .combobox-options. And we don't need to return anything from this function because we're just attaching this object to the widget. So now back up in our bind UI actions function, we can change it to use the cached elements. And the same goes for the open close function. And we'll make sure to apply it for the show and hide. And now it'll work the same way on the page. So if we click go, it opens and it closes right away. And the reason why is because we're calling .next. And .next isn't very specific. So we're actually grabbing more than one element. So let's use .siblings instead. And inside of .siblings, we're going to target specifically combo box options. So now if we click go, it opens and it doesn't close right away. And if we click go again, it closes. So now we know that we can use our cached elements properly. So let's create the functionality for the item select. So we'll use the this._on function again, and the parameter we're first going to pass it is the list items inside the combo box options, which we have cached. So we can say this.cached.comboboxoptions space li. Then we'll pass through our object, and we only care about when it's clicked. And when it's clicked, we'll create a function called select li. So below open close, we'll create a function called select li. And inside of here, we need to get the list item that was selected. We don't have that element cached. How do we have access to that? Well, select li will actually have an event parameter for us to access. So if we console.log e.target, we should see the element that's selected. So if I click go, and now I click tweets, we can see that the span of tweets has been selected. But there's a little bit of a problem. If I click a little bit out, we see that the li has been selected. So how are we going to handle this? Well, the simplest way to handle this is to not really care about where the user clicks. And the way we can not care is by getting the same information back. Now, some of you might think this is a bit redundant, but it's the simplest way to do it, and there's really little to no consequence of doing it this way. So just as we're adding a data-value attribute to the list item, we're going to add it to this as well. So we're going to say data-value equals, and it's the same value that we're adding to the list item. So now in select li, instead of logging e.target, let's first get it, and so we'll call selected li, and we'll wrap e.target in a jQuery selector, and let's console.log the value of the selected li, which can be accessed through the data value. So now when I select tweets, I know I'm selecting on the span, and I still get tweets. And now if I select all the way in the corner, I still get tweets. So it doesn't actually really matter where I click now, I still get the same value. And let's get rid of this console.log. And the next thing we want to do is we want to take the value that we clicked on and we want to put that inside the text box. So let's store that in a variable. We'll call that selected value. And since we have the text box cached, we'll call this .cached.textbox, and we'll set its value to selected value. And we'll change this to value instead of val. So now we'll open it, we click tweets, and we get tweets. If we switch to likes, we also get likes. Now just because we have the text box populating with the selected value doesn't mean we're done. We want to change the selected value of the hidden select element as well. That way whenever you do a form post, it'll work with the native select element. And another thing we want to do is we want to close the text box whenever the option has been selected. So we can just call this .openClose. And now we'll assign the hidden HTML element's value. So we'll say this .element, and we'll say its value is the selected value. And then we'll console.log this .element.val. So now we'll select tweets, and we see we get tweets, and we also see that the options close. We'll select it again for likes, and we see that we get likes. So we'll get rid of the console.log, and we're almost done with this function. The last thing we need to do is we need to trigger the callback that the user might pass through as an option. And to do so, we can use that trigger function we saw in the example widget. So we can call this ._trigger, and we'll pass through a string of change. And change right here maps up to the options right here for change. So now in our HTML, let's actually provide an option for change. And every time something's changed, we'll alert changed. So now we'll select tweets, and we see that we get an alert box for changed. So now let's get rid of this option so the future testing goes a bit easier. And let's come back up to the top and consult our to-do list. We've created a combo box from a select element, we've shown and hide the list, and we've added the select item functionality. So now what we need to do is we need to add the destroy method. And this is really easy. So we already have a destroy method stubbed out for us. And to destroy this widget, we need to remove the combo box, and we need to show the select element. So all I have to say is this.combobox.remove, and then we'll say this.element.show. And to test to see if our destroy function works properly, let's create a button. And we'll give it an ID of destroy. And we'll give it a value of destroy. And below where we're initializing our combo box, we'll select the button. And when this button is clicked, we'll pass through a function that calls the destroy method of the combo box. And we're just going to pass through destroy. So now if we click destroy, you can see that we just have our select element. So back up on our to-do list, we can see our last thing to do is implement an autocomplete. But there actually is a couple other things that we need to do. We need to implement a value and a text method. And this will allow us to get the current value or text selected from the combo box. So right now, all of our functions are private. They all have underscores next to them. So below bind UI actions, let's create some public functions. We'll create a public function called val. And all val will do is it'll return the select element, it'll get its children, and it'll find the one that's selected and return the value. And text will be very similar. We'll find the one selected, but instead of returning the value, we'll return the text. So now let's go back to our HTML page and we'll add a button to test this. We'll create a button, we'll give it an ID of val-text, and we'll give it a value of val-text. So we'll copy the click handler for destroy. So when the val-text button is clicked, let's log to the console the current value and text selected. So we'll select likes. We'll click val-text, and we can see that the value is likes and the text is likes. So now on our to-do list, the last thing we have to do is the autocomplete. And this is the bonus round. So if this is already too long and boring for you, feel free to check out. But if you want to see how we can implement an autocomplete with this guy, stick around. So to add the autocomplete functionality, let's go to the bind UI actions function. So we'll use the this_on function, and we'll say this.cached, we're going to find the text box. And the event we care about for the text box is key up. So when there's a key up function, we're going to call _autocomplete. So let's create that above the bind UI actions function. So just to show you what the key up event does, let's log the value of the cached text box. So hello is the default value. Now watch the console as I delete hello. And then if I type hello again. So as you can see, every time I key, that value gets logged to the console. And that'll be very useful for autocomplete. So let's store that value as a variable called term. And that's the term that we're looking for as we autocomplete. So we can say if term is not equal to an empty string, then let's find some results. So we'll create a results variable up here, and we'll just set it to null. So if term is not an empty string, we want to see if there's any list items in the combo box that contain the term. So we'll store it in results, and we'll get the cached combo box, and we'll get its list items, and there we'll find anything that might have text that contains the term. So let's console.log the first result. So now let's delete hello, and you see we keep getting undefined because there's nothing that matches that. And then we get cannot read property 0 of null because there's no results. So if we hit Shift L, we see likes. And if I let go of the shift, it keys up again, so likes appears again. So now we know that we're getting results. So if we're getting results, we want to check for that so we're not getting an error. And if we're getting results, we only want to show the ones that match the term. So let's start out by getting all the list items. And this will actually be the children, which is something we could go back and cache, but we'll just leave it at this for now, because this will be the spans. So we'll create a variable called spans. And we only want the ones that are not the results. And the reason why we want the ones that are not the results is because we want to hide them. But we need the list items to show if there are results. So we'll select all of the list items again, and we'll show them. So I'll start deleting hello. And as you can see, it's just a blank list. And if I just type a capital L, we're still not getting anything. And that's because at the top of the if results statement, we want to make sure that everything is showing. So not just the combo box, but the list items as well as all the spans. And then once we come down here, we can hide what we want to hide, because this is essentially resetting any search that we might have previously made. So now we'll delete hello, and we still have a blank one, because there's no results. But if I type a capital L, likes comes down its position. And this really isn't the functionality we're looking for. We just want likes, not the blank box above. So how do we fix that? And the way we fix that is that we want to hide not only the spans that do not match, but we also want to hide the spans parents. So we'll just call spans.parent.hide. So now as I get rid of hello, nothing shows up, but if I hit a capital L, we get likes. And if I get rid of it and I type in capital T, tweets appears. But one problem we're having is if we get rid of T, tweet still appears. So we'll make an else statement here, and everything we're showing up here, we're going to hide. So we'll get rid of hello, we'll hit a capital L, and now if we remove it, it goes away. Now in our markup, just for fun, let's create a longer select list. So if we click go, we can see that it's much longer. So now let's type in A, and we get America and Apple. If we type in a capital P, we get pluses. But a problem we have is that our search is case sensitive. We may want it to be case insensitive. So how do we fix that? For a quick fix, I've had a custom jQuery expression called iContains, and iContains is the same thing as contains, but it's just a case-insensitive search. So down in our autocomplete function, where we're looking for a span that contains a term, we'll just change that to iContains. So now if we type in A, we get lowercase a's as well as capital A's. And one thing you might notice if you're testing around is if you type in L, you'll have all your options for L. But if you get rid of it and you click go again, nothing shows up. And that's because we don't have any results to match. To fix this, we'll go to our else block. So essentially we're saying if there's results, show everything first, and then we're going to hide what we don't need. And then we're saying else, we don't want anything to show up. And that's not necessarily true. We don't want the entire list to show up, but we do want the list items and the spans to be visible if the user clicks on the button to show everything. So we'll change these two options to show rather than hide. So now when I type in L, I get all my items for L, and when I remove L and hit the go button, everything shows up. In this video, we refactored our combo box to work more modularly with a jQuery UI widget. We started out by creating a jQuery plugin, but we quickly learned the limitations of it, especially when we were trying to add our own custom methods. So we switched over to creating a jQuery UI widget. And we learned by creating a jQuery UI widget that a lot of the functionality that we would have had to implement for a plugin is already implemented for us, such as merging for options, setting callbacks, and public and private functions. So at the end of the day, if you're still wondering why you should create a jQuery widget over a jQuery plugin, well, the main rule of thumb is that if it's a UI component, you're much likely better off creating it as a jQuery UI widget. But if it's just something small that does an independent task, then you're probably better off with a jQuery plugin. And just like always, if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, or if you think anything needs to be explained further, just let me know.